Content warning. This episode discusses an unsolved death involving possible suicide or foul play. Viewer discretion advised. November 29, 1970, a valley in western Norway. A hiker is walking the trails in late autumn when the weather is turning cold and the season is becoming harsh. The hiker discovers something in the rocks, a human body. Burned, charred, barely recognizable as human. The body is arranged in a way that suggests deliberate placement. Gasoline containers, or what remains of them, are scattered nearby. Someone has done this intentionally. But here's where the mystery begins. The body has no identification. The fingerprints have been sanded away. The dental records don't match any known person. The woman, because she is a woman, is completely unidentifiable. And when Norwegian authorities investigate, they discover that the mystery goes much deeper than a simple death. This woman had 8 different identities, 8 different passports, 8 different names. And according to every document, every identity, she never existed. The Isdalen Valley is a beautiful part of western Norway. It sits in the Hordaland region near the city of Bergen. It's a hiking area, mountains, valleys, streams, forests, the kind of place people go to escape, the kind of place that should be peaceful. On November 29, 1970, that peace was interrupted when a hiker found the body. The discovery triggered an investigation that would become one of the strangest and most frustrating cases in Norwegian criminal history. The woman, who became known as the Isdal woman, was approximately 25 to 35 years old at the time of her death. She was well preserved by the cold, so the initial estimation was that she had died only a few days before being found. But the timeline of her death would remain unclear. Some investigators thought she had been there for much longer. What was immediately clear was that someone had tried to erase her identity. Her clothing had labels carefully removed. Her hands had been sanded down to remove fingerprints. The gasoline containers and the burns on her body suggested that someone had attempted to destroy her remains. But the body itself was relatively intact. She had not been burned beyond recognition. And when the investigation proceeded, it revealed something that contradicted every conventional assumption about who this woman was and why she was in the valley. The Norwegian police began investigating as they would any unidentified death. They took fingerprints, they took dental impressions. They attempted to identify the body through available databases and Interpol records. They found nothing. But the investigation took a dramatic turn when they discovered her belongings. Among the items found near the body were 8 different passports, 8 different documents, 8 different names. All of them were the same woman. All of them appeared to be genuine, though at least some were forgeries of remarkable quality. The names on the passports were Fingen Hoffman, Margaretha Iversen, Gro Farseth, and others. Some of the passports were issued by Norwegian authorities. Some were from other countries. The documents suggested that this woman had moved across borders using multiple identities. The sophistication of the forgeries suggested official involvement. Someone with state-level resources had created these documents. The fingerprint situation presented another clue. The fingerprints on the body had been deliberately sanded away. This was not an accidental erosion. This was intentional. Someone had taken sandpaper or a similar abrasive surface and abraded the fingers to remove all traces of identification. This kind of deliberate erasure is not something an amateur does. This is tradecraft. The clothing told another story. All the labels had been carefully removed or covered. No identifying marks remained. Even the care with which this had been done suggested someone with knowledge of how identification works. Someone trained to prevent tracing. The gasoline containers and the evidence of burning suggested that the intent was to destroy the body entirely, but the job had been incomplete. Either the person responsible had been interrupted, or they had miscalculated how much fuel would be needed to completely destroy the body. In any case, enough remained for identification, though who this woman was remained a complete mystery. The investigation found evidence that the Isdal woman had stayed in several hotels in Bergen in the days before her death. She had registered under one of her false names. The hotel workers described her as quiet and discreet. She kept to herself. She didn't socialize. She was there for a short time, and then she was gone. None of the hotels had records of where she was going next. None of them reported anything unusual about her behavior. She had simply checked out and disappeared into the Norwegian landscape. When she was found in the valley, the theory began to form that she had walked into the wilderness and then set the fire herself. The presence of gasoline containers suggested a planned method of self-destruction. The deliberate removal of identifying information, including sanding her fingerprints, suggested someone who wanted to make sure she could not be traced back to any identity. But there were problems with the suicide theory. If you're planning to commit suicide, why would you bother to remove your fingerprints? Fingerprints of a dead person are easy to identify. If the goal is simply to end your life, the additional step of erasing your identity suggests something else. It suggests that someone cared about not being traced, not in death, but in life. There's something darker in that calculation. Three theories have emerged around the Isdal woman, and each of them is supported by evidence that raises questions about the others. The first theory is that the Isdal woman was a Cold War spy. This theory is based on several pieces of evidence. The multiple passports with forged documents suggest state-level resources. The careful removal of identifying information is consistent with intelligence tradecraft. The false identities and the movement across borders suggest clandestine operations. The theory proposes that the woman was either a Soviet agent operating in Scandinavia or a Western intelligence asset. The Cold War was at a particular intensity in 1970. Espionage activities were constant. Scandinavian countries, particularly Norway, were strategic locations for intelligence operations. A woman with multiple identities operating in Bergen could easily have been an intelligence officer. What happened, according to this theory, is that something went wrong. She was discovered, she was compromised, and either she decided to end her life rather than be captured or interrogated, or she was killed and made to look like a suicide. The careful erasure of identity would make sense in either scenario. If she was killed by another intelligence agency, they would want to prevent identification. If she killed herself to protect operational secrets, she would want to prevent identification. The evidence against this theory is that no intelligence agency has ever confirmed this woman's status. Neither the CIA, nor the KGB, nor Norwegian intelligence has released information suggesting they knew who this woman was. In a case this significant, in a death this notorious, you would expect some confirmation or leak from one of these organizations. The silence is itself strange. The second theory is that the Isdal woman was a victim of murder. Someone killed her. Someone wanted her dead. And that someone went to great lengths to make sure she could never be identified or traced. The burned remains, the removed fingerprints, the absence of identifying information in her clothing, all of this suggests that the perpetrator was very careful and very experienced. The theory proposes several possible motives. She could have been killed by a romantic partner who wanted to hide her death. She could have been killed by a criminal organization for breaking some code of silence. She could have been killed by a state actor as an intelligence operation. The evidence for this theory is the obvious preparation and care taken to destroy the body and remove traces of identity. This is not the work of someone acting in panic or desperation. This is calculated. This is planned. The evidence against this theory is the lack of any witness reports, the complete absence of anyone coming forward to claim knowledge of her death, and the total absence of evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. The third theory is that the Isdal woman died by her own hand. She was troubled. She was living a life of deception, using false identities, moving between borders and hotels. The weight of that life, whether it was chosen or forced upon her, became too much. She walked into the valley. She had containers of gasoline. She made a decision to end it. And in the process, she took steps to make sure that no one would be able to trace her identity back to whoever she really was. The evidence for this theory is the presence of the gasoline containers and the apparent intentional setting of the fire. The location in an isolated valley suggests a deliberate choice to ensure no interference. The removal of identifying information could be interpreted as a final act of control. She chose what would remain of her identity. The evidence against this theory is the difficulty of actually setting yourself on fire. The human body has survival instincts that make this extremely difficult. Most people who attempt this method change their mind or cannot complete the act. The evidence of the burns on the body suggests they were relatively limited, not the kind of extensive burning you would expect from a determined suicide. For years after her death, the Norwegian police continued to pursue the case. Investigation documents mention contact with various intelligence agencies, but the results, if any were produced, were kept classified. In 2016, the case was briefly reopened. New forensic techniques were available. DNA analysis had advanced significantly. The hope was that modern technology might finally reveal who the Isdal woman was. DNA samples were taken from the remains. The DNA profile was run against databases. No match was found. No relative came forward claiming kinship. The new investigation produced no new identification. In 2017, the case was closed again. The formal investigation ended. The Isdal woman remained unidentified. She was buried in Bergen Cemetery under a headstone that bears no name, only a reference to the valley where she was found and the date of her death. 20 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. No credible identification has been made. No person has come forward claiming to know who she was. No intelligence agency has released information about her true identity or her operations. The Isdal woman represents something that runs deep in Cold War history. She represents the machinery of espionage that operated in the shadows of European capitals. She represents the people who were caught in that machinery and who either chose to end themselves or were ended by forces they could not resist. Her 8 passports suggest a life of deception. Her forged documents suggest state resources. Her careful erasure of identity suggests someone with training and motivation to disappear. Whether she was an intelligence officer, a victim of intelligence operations, or someone trapped by circumstances beyond her control, the result is the same. She is gone. She is unidentified. And the valley in Norway holds her secret. The archive goes deeper, and sometimes the archive only contains questions. The Isdal woman was someone. She had a life before the multiple identities. She had a name that was real. But that name is lost now. It exists only in the memories of people who may no longer be living. It exists in classified files that may never be released. It exists in the deliberate erasure that someone, somewhere, took great care to complete. She remains in that valley, in the records, in the photographs of her belongings and her documents, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to endure, and some people are meant to remain unknown.